That Tuesday morning, I started my day, September 11th, 2001, in the director's area of the CIA in Langley, Virginia. We were going to have a routine meeting about 9 o'clock, and the meeting was delayed a little bit. We gathered around the TV, and we were watching, and we could see the footage of that first tower. We saw smoke coming from it, and we're quite sure we saw the text that the plane had hit the tower. We didn't know. It was a little Cessna. I had no idea what was going on. As we huddled around, we saw a second plane hit the second tower. And at first, we weren't sure if it was a replay. And then when we learned it was not, that it was in fact an airplane hitting the other World Trade Center tower in New York, we knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was terrorism. The first plane we learned was American Airlines Flight 11, had left Boston for LA. 92 people on board, and the second airplane was United Flight 175, also a 767 out of Boston, headed for LA with 65 people on it. It was absolutely stunning and sobering to see all of this live. All hell broke loose for us then because we learned there were more airplanes that were unaccounted for, and we didn't know what was happening over the skies of the USA. It was kind of like a Tom Clancy novel. We knew it was a terrorist attack, no doubt about it, but it was happening so quick. About 9:30, we started hearing rumors of an explosion at the State Department in downtown DC, and that was not true. And then there were reports of an airplane hitting the Pentagon just 8 miles away from the CIA, and unfortunately, that was in fact true. That was American Airlines Flight 77 out of Dulles, Virginia. 9:45 that morning, the Capitol and the White House were evacuated, and U.S. airspace was shut down. 3,300 planes were descended in no time. 1,200 private planes, 3,300 commercial airliners, and in no time the skies went silent. 15 minutes later, about 10 in the morning, we were horrified to watch that first tower collapse. And a half an hour later, the second tower went down just when you thought it couldn't get any worse. It was absolutely horrifying. About the same time as that second tower going down, about 10:30 in the morning, we learned that the Vice President had given the order that if need be, the F-15 pilots or the F-15 aircraft that had taken off should in fact shoot down commercial airliners if that was necessary to protect citizens on the ground. Right after that, we got reporting of a flight that had crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and it was chilling because we had no way of knowing at that time that the President's order the Vice President's order never actually made it to the F-15 pilots. And we didn't know that the plane had actually crashed 30 minutes prior to that. We just weren't sure what had happened. That plane went down because of some really brave souls in United Airlines Flight 93 out of Newark, New Jersey, and they sacrificed themselves to save God knows who on the ground. After we found out about Flight 93, we had reporting of another jet that was hijacked and that was heading for DC. Turned out to be a false alarm, but there were still planes unaccounted for, and no shortage of targets in Washington between the Capitol, the White House, CIA, and who knows where. 10:45, there was a mass evacuation of Washington, D.C. and lower Manhattan. That's when the director of CIA ordered that our compound be evacuated as well, which we had never done before, and sent employees home. The director was not going to leave. George Tenet was the director. He was not going to leave, and we had to set up a command post for him somewhere else on the campus, but not in the main building, so that he could continue to operate during the crisis. I headed to the basement of the CIA building, the main building there. I didn't leave. I didn't go home. I knew my employees were still going to be needed. We were going to ramp up the CIA around the world in Washington. I didn't go to the basement because it's safe, or that there's a bunker there, or that, like a brave. My office was in the suburbs, and there's going to be a lot of traffic, and I had no place to go. So I went down there and set up my own little command post in the mailroom so that I could ask people to not go home while everybody else was headed the other way. Most of the employees in CIA left as ordered. People on the senior leadership team and the counter-terrorist center did not go. They refused to go. They needed to work. Like the rest of the national security community, we were trying to figure out what in fact had happened. Spent the afternoon trying to make sense of it. And by then we knew all of the airplanes were accounted for. Didn't know if there were going to be other attacks, maybe different attacks. Just wasn't sure. We weren't sure if the other shoe was going to drop. We didn't know that it was all over by that point. There were 4 planes loaded with gas for cross-country flights that had been hijacked. There were 15 Saudi nationals, 2 Emiratis, Lebanese, and an Egyptian that had hijacked those airplanes. and it was all over in 2 hours from when that first plane hit. I was like a lot of people, a little shocked, and what I needed to do first was call people who were close to me. And I called my wife, who was a CIA contracting officer, and made sure that she was okay, and my daughter, who was about 2. Called my sons, who were preteens. They lived in Pennsylvania. And I even called my mother, who was 75, and she's in Baltimore. It was totally illogical, but I felt like I needed to hear everybody's voice before I got back to work. Late afternoon, we had an unexpected problem at the CIA headquarters gate in Virginia. We had a line of traffic headed in, a whole line of cars, and we had shut down the compound, so we didn't know what that was about. And it turns out it was the night shift coming in, and they had decided they were coming in early. And we also found that employees that left and went home as ordered saw on TV what had happened and decided they were coming back in, and nobody turned them away. The afternoon of the 11th, news reports started popping that the intelligence community was saying Osama bin Laden was the culprit. About dinner time, the president landed back in Washington, D.C. He had been diverted from Florida, where he was, to 2 other Air Force bases on Air Force One, and he decided I'm coming home, whether there's a threat or no threat. And at the press conference in New York that afternoon, the mayor was asked how many casualties he thought there were. And he said, more than any of us can bear. The rest of the evening, the first responders in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon kept doing their jobs. About 11 p.m. that Tuesday night, 13 hours after the tragedy, Port Authority police officer Will Jimenez was pulled from the rubble. About midnight, the president went to bed, but before he went to bed, he wrote in his journal that the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century took place today, and we think Osama bin Laden did it. I tried to sleep a little bit on the mailroom floor in the headquarters building there, but it wasn't going to happen very well. Wednesday morning, the 12th, miraculously, another Port Authority police officer was rescued from the rubble, John McLaughlin, and there would be no other survivors. 9/11, we saw teamwork and tragedy among public servants like we had never seen before. It was the largest loss of life in a single day for public servants in the USA. New York Fire Department lost 343 fatalities. Port Authority Police Department lost 37, and the New York Police lost 23. At the Pentagon, 125 public servants lost their life. 70 civilians and 55 service members passed away. 8:45 on that Tuesday morning, there were maybe 16,000 workers in both of the World Trade Center towers, and all but 2,100 of them got out. It was an unbelievable evacuation by firefighters and police at tremendous personal risk. And that reminds me of another line from that Alan Jackson song, "Heroes who died just doing what they do." Just doing what they do. So our first priority was New York City, and the details of what went on in New York City are still classified, but I can tell you I had to send people up right away, morning of the 12th, to deal with that tragedy. And that's when I met my first hero of this story. I'll tell you everything I talk about tonight, I am certainly not the hero in this story. There are a whole bunch of men and women that did heroic things. The first one that I met was, her name's Becky. And Becky confronted me and said, "Mr. Banks, you're sending a lot of people up to New York. You know they're all men, right?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, I'd like to contribute." And I didn't know Becky all that well, but I said, I understand it's pretty gruesome up there. Is that really what you want to do? And she said, "Mr. Banks, I'm a volunteer firefighter, and I've been on the site of more crashes and fatalities than you could handle." I was like, "Yes, you're right." And so I did the right thing, and I scolded her, and I said, "You better get on the next train to New York." And when she got back, she told me how eerie it was on the first days after 9/11 to take a taxi cab past the Pentagon that was still in smoke, and take a train to New York. All the planes were still grounded, and go straight to the World Trade Center site that was still smoldering. It was called Ground Zero by that point. And from then on, I tried to draw on all of the talent that we had in the agency and make sure I wasn't, that my blind spots wasn't leaving anything undone. So our hearts were heavy after the attacks on that Tuesday, the night of the attack. Our counterterrorist center and the senior leadership team worked all night long, round the clock, for justice. The next day, on the 12th of September, CIA briefed the president on a plan to overthrow the Taliban and topple al-Qaeda, including a pledge that CIA officers would be on the ground within 2 weeks. And they were going to go there to lash up with the Afghan Northern Alliance commanders that we had maintained a relationship with. We kept a relationship with them after the Russians left in the early 90s and the Taliban took over, and the Northern Alliance was a coalition of Afghans that controlled maybe 10% of the countryside. Kofor Black was the name of the head of the counter-terrorist center, and he told the president that he was going to deliver bin Laden's head on a platter, and he was dead serious. I worked pretty much around the clock, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and it ran the gamut of anything from how to feed people in an around-the-clock building to lots of other things that we were trying to get done in those first couple of days. And it's interesting to go from a sort of a peacetime outfit to overnight on this footing. And I had people come to me saying, well, we should probably break out the MREs, the meals ready to eat, the military rations, since we're on this emergency footing. And I said, you know, we got Burger King here on the compound. And if we want to, we could break the locks off and maybe grill burgers ourselves. That sounds like a lot of work. Domino's is still delivering. How can we just send those? Who's eating meals ready to eat MREs? Would you eat them if you didn't have to? Yeah. It kind of tastes like crap. So I kept sending more folks to New York. We were dealing with the devastation there. We were also trying to get our heads around invading Afghanistan, returning to Afghanistan. I spent 3 days in the building, catnapping on the floor. Started to smell pretty bad. Decided I better go home and shower and get some clothing, and then come back in for the weekend. And so Friday the 14th, I drove home. I drove down empty highways past Douglas Airport, where Flight 77 had been hijacked from. I drove into Ashburn, Virginia, into my little community, and down my street. And before I could go to my house where my wife and daughter were, I just had to pull over and cry so hard to let go of the stress and the tension and all that was that tragedy before I could go into the house.